What if the Schlieffen Plan, Germany's audacious blueprint for a lightning victory, actually succeeded in crushing France within weeks? In August 1914, as German armies surged through Belgium, they avoid the fateful delays and blunders of our history, smashing through Allied lines, encircling Paris, and forcing a swift capitulation. No endless trenches, no 4-year slaughter. Instead, a triumphant Kaiserreich redraws Europe's map overnight, unleashing butterfly effects that topple empires, avert revolutions, and reshape the 20th century. Join us in this chilling alternate timeline where one flawless invasion spares millions, but at what terrifying cost to the world order. The Schlieffen Plan, conceived by Count Alfred von Schlieffen in 1905 and refined by Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, called for a massive wheeling movement, 7 armies, over 1 million men, swinging through neutral Belgium and Luxembourg to envelop Paris from the west while a smaller force held the Alsace-Lorraine frontier. In our timeline, logistical breakdowns, Belgian resistance, and the premature transfer of troops to the Eastern Front slowed the advance, allowing the French to counter at the Battle of the Marne in September 1914. In this divergence, everything aligns perfectly for Germany. The right wing, 1st and 2nd Armies under Kluck and Bülow, receives reinforced supply lines and stricter adherence to the original timetable. Belgian fortifications at Liège fall in days rather than weeks, thanks to better coordination of the massive 420 mm Big Bertha howitzers. King Albert's army retreats in disarray instead of holding the line. By late August, German cavalry screens push deep into France, cutting French rail networks and preventing the rapid redeployment of Joffre's forces from the eastern frontier. The critical moment comes at the Marne. In reality, a gap opened between Kluck's 1st and Bülow's 2nd Army, exploited by the French 6th Army and the British Expeditionary Force. Here, Moltke's staff detects the risk early, ordering Kluck to wheel inward sooner and maintain contact. The BEF, outnumbered and exhausted after the retreat from Mons, is caught in open field near Compiègne on September 5. Sir John French's forces suffer catastrophic losses, over 40,000 casualties in 2 days, forcing a headlong flight toward the Channel ports. Paris, now threatened from both north and west, is encircled by September 15. French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre, facing collapse of the entire northern front, urges President Poincaré to evacuate the government to Bordeaux. Panic grips the capital, civilians flood southward. On September 22, 1914, German Uhlans enter the suburbs. Kaiser Wilhelm II, elated, demands unconditional surrender. With no viable defensive line left and the British unable to reinforce meaningfully, Prime Minister Viviani's cabinet authorizes armistice talks on September 28. The Treaty of Compiègne, signed in the same railway carriage that would later host Hitler's 1940 triumph, is inked on October 5. France cedes Brie-Longueuil or Fields, accepts occupation of the north, pays massive indemnities, and recognizes Belgian annexation. On the Eastern Front, the knock-on effects are immediate. Without the need to rush 2 corps westward in August, Hindenburg and Ludendorff face a weakened Russian invasion of East Prussia. The Battle of Tannenberg, already a victory in our history, becomes an annihilation. Both Russian 1st and 2nd Armies are encircled and destroyed by mid-September, with over 300,000 prisoners. Stunned by dual catastrophes, Tsar Nicholas II's generals advise against further offensives. Russia sues for separate peace in November, ceding Poland and the Baltic provinces in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed 4 years early. Britain, isolated and facing submarine threats to its shipping, negotiates from weakness. By Christmas 1914, a general armistice halts the slaughter before trenches scar the continent. The Great War ends in German victory after barely 4 months, with casualties in the hundreds of thousands rather than millions. The Kaiserreich stands triumphant, its armies undefeated, its prestige soaring. But as Europe catches its breath, the seeds of an entirely new world order, dominated by Imperial Germany, begin to sprout from the ashes of a war that never became great. But as Europe catches its breath, the seeds of an entirely new world order, dominated by Imperial Germany, begin to sprout from the ashes of a war that never became great. With France humbled and Russia knocked out by early 1915, Britain stands alone against a victorious Central Powers bloc. The Royal Navy maintains maritime supremacy, blockading German ports and protecting imperial trade routes, but without a continental ally, London faces strategic isolation. Kaiser Wilhelm II, emboldened by triumph, demands colonial concessions and naval parity. Negotiations drag through 1915 in The Hague, culminating in the Treaty of London in May 1916. Britain recognizes German hegemony in Europe, cedes Tanganyika and parts of Nigeria, and accepts limits on future dreadnought construction. In return, Germany evacuates northern France and Belgium, now a puppet state under a pro-German king. The British Empire survives intact but diminished, its prestige shattered, its finances strained by war debts. Germany emerges as the undisputed master of continental Europe. The Kaiserreich annexes Luxembourg, the Brie-Longueuil or Basin, and creates a satellite kingdom of Poland from Russian territory. Austria-Hungary, rewarded for loyalty, gains Serbian lands and Montenegro, stabilizing the dual monarchy temporarily. The Ottoman Empire, allied and undefeated, retains Arabia and Mesopotamia, delaying Arab revolts and British Middle Eastern ambitions. A customs union, Middle Europa, binds Germany, Austria-Hungary, Poland, and the Low Countries into an economic bloc that dominates European markets. Berlin's industrial might surges unchecked, Krupp and Siemens expand rapidly, exporting capital and technology eastward. The United States, having declared neutrality and profited immensely from selling arms and loans to both sides before the quick German victory, retreats deeper into isolationism. Woodrow Wilson's "peace without victory" rhetoric rings hollow. America avoids entanglement in European affairs, focusing instead on Latin American interventions and Pacific expansion. No League of Nations forms. Germany rejects any supranational body that might constrain its power. Tactical innovation stagnates without prolonged trench warfare. Tanks, poison gas, and strategic bombing remain theoretical curiosities. Armies prioritize cavalry and traditional infantry doctrine. Yet naval and aerial technology advances steadily in peacetime competition. Germany's high seas fleet grows to rival Britain's, sparking a second dreadnought race by the 1920s. Zeppelin raids on British cities in late 1915, unopposed due to the weakened BEF, forced London to invest heavily in anti-air defenses and early fighter aircraft. Major conflicts shift to the periphery. In 1917 to 1918, a German-backed Ukrainian nationalist uprising severs the breadbasket from a weakening Russian Empire, already plagued by strikes and mutinies. Without total war exhaustion, the Bolshevik Revolution fizzles, Lenin remains in Swiss exile, Trotsky is assassinated in Mexico. Tsar Nicholas II abdicates in favor of a constitutional monarchy under Grand Duke Michael, who signs a humiliating peace but preserves the Romanov dynasty. A White Russia, authoritarian yet modernizing, becomes Germany's reluctant junior partner. In Asia, Japan, having seized German Pacific possessions early in the war, keeps them under the peace terms, expanding into China unchecked. The 21 demands of 1915 become permanent, turning northern China into a Japanese sphere. Britain, unable to contest Pacific dominance, cedes influence in the region. By the mid-1920s, the world order crystallizes around a German-led Europe facing a maritime Anglo-American bloc across the Atlantic and a resurgent, militarized Japan in the east. Colonial unrest simmers. Irish rebellion in 1916 is crushed brutally, Indian nationalism grows. But without the moral and financial bankruptcy of a long war, empires endure. The stage is set for a colder, more calculated rivalry, economic blocs, proxy wars in Africa and Asia, and an arms race that promises future conflicts deadlier than any trench slaughter could have been. The stage is set for a colder, more calculated rivalry, economic blocs, proxy wars in Africa and Asia, and an arms race that promises future conflicts deadlier than any trench slaughter could have been. The 1920s and 1930s unfold under the long shadow of German hegemony, a world of imperial stability laced with simmering resentments. The Kaiserreich, flush with indemnities and resources, becomes the economic engine of Europe. Berlin's banks finance reconstruction in France and Russia, binding former enemies in debt while extracting favorable trade terms. French society fractures along revanchist lines, Action Française and royalist movements gain traction, blaming Republican weakness for the 1914 defeat. Yet without total exhaustion or Versailles humiliation, extremist ideologies struggle. Communism remains marginal. Fascism, inspired by Mussolini's 1922 March on Rome, spreads in Italy and Spain but finds little fertile ground in a prosperous Germany or a monarchist France. Socially, the absence of mass mobilization and trench trauma preserves traditional hierarchies longer. Women's wartime factory roles never materialize at scale, delaying suffrage movements. France grants votes only in 1935, Britain expands incrementally. Anti-Semitism persists in Eastern Europe but lacks the explosive catalyst of defeat and scapegoating. No Dreyfus-level crises escalate into pogroms on an industrial scale. Jewish communities in Poland and Ukraine thrive under German protection, contributing to scientific and cultural golden ages in Berlin and Vienna. Politically, the monarchist order endures. Kaiser Wilhelm II dies in 1921, succeeded by the more moderate Wilhelm III, who evolves the Reich into a constitutional monarchy with a strong Reichstag. Austria-Hungary, bolstered by victory, resists Slavic nationalism through ruthless majorization and German oversight. The Ottoman Empire modernizes slowly under Enver Pasha's successors, retaining control over Arab provinces through oil concessions to German firms. Decolonization stalls indefinitely. British India sees limited self-rule under loyal Maharajas, French Algeria integrates as overseas departments, and Belgian Congo remains a private fiefdom. Technological progress follows peacetime logic. Without urgent wartime needs, aviation advances steadily through commercial competition. Transatlantic Zeppelin routes dominate by 1925, followed by heavier-than airliners. Rocketry and radio flourish in academic settings. Goddard and Oberth collaborate with German funding. Yet military innovation lags. No tanks force doctrinal revolution. Armies emphasize mobile infantry and cavalry supported by motorized logistics. Naval supremacy becomes the decisive arena. Germany's fleet reaches parity with Britain's by 1930, stationing battleships in the Mediterranean and Pacific. Global power crystallizes into three uneasy blocks. The German-led Middle Europa dominates the continent and penetrates Latin America through trade. Britain retreats to a splendid isolation plus empire strategy, fortifying Singapore and Suez while courting American investment. The United States, booming from uninterrupted exports, emerges as the world's financial superpower, its dollar rivaling the mark. Japan consolidates its Asian co-prosperity sphere earlier, annexing Manchuria outright in 1928 with tacit German approval to counter Russian recovery. Proxy conflicts define the interwar era. In 1928 to 1931, German-backed forces crush a Bolshevik remnant uprising in Ukraine, securing grain exports. British intrigue sparks revolts in Ottoman Iraq, countered by Luftstreitkräfte air support. A naval crisis in 1934 over Venezuelan oil nearly escalates to war between America and Germany, resolved only by arbitration in Geneva. No international body holds real power, but ad hoc great power conferences maintain fragile peace. By the late 1930s, demographic and economic pressures mount. France's population stagnates under occupation scars, while Germany's youth bulge demands Lebensraum rhetoric redirected toward colonial expansion in Africa. Russia, under a modernizing Tsarist regime, reindustrializes rapidly, eyeing lost territories. The world edges toward confrontation, not ideological apocalypse, but a calculated clash of empires armed with dreadnoughts, submarines, and early aircraft carriers, promising destruction on a scale that makes our Great War seem quaint. The world edges toward confrontation, not ideological apocalypse, but a calculated clash of empires armed with dreadnoughts, submarines, and early aircraft carriers, promising destruction on a scale that makes our Great War seem quaint. The breaking point arrives in 1941, sparked by competing ambitions in the crumbling Ottoman successor states. Germany, seeking secure oil routes, backs a coup in Iraq against British influence. London responds with naval blockades and landings in Basra. Japan, emboldened by its unchallenged Asian sphere, seizes French Indochina after Paris, still weakened and resentful, refuses Berlin's demands for bases. The conflict rapidly escalates into the Second Great War, 1941 to 1947, a global naval and colonial struggle pitting the Middle Europa bloc, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman remnants, puppet states, against the Anglo-American-Japanese maritime alliance, forged in desperation. Battles rage across oceans and peripheries rather than European heartlands. The High Seas Fleet, now augmented with carriers converted from passenger liners, clashes with the Royal Navy in the North Atlantic, the Battle of the Azores in 1943 becomes the largest fleet engagement in history, ending in costly stalemate. American convoys, protected by burgeoning escort carriers, tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. In Asia, Japanese forces overrun British Malaya and Burma, but stretched thin against Chinese guerrilla resistance fueled by U.S. Lend-Lease via India. German U-boats ravage Atlantic shipping, yet Allied code-breaking and radar-guided destroyers gradually turn the tide. On land, fighting remains limited. Germany invades a recalcitrant Russia in 1942, reaching the Volga but bogging down in vast spaces without the ideological fury of our timeline's Eastern Front. No Holocaust emerges, systematic persecution persists, but industrialized genocide never materializes amid victory's confidence. Atomic research, pursued leisurely in peacetime, accelerates only in 1944. American and German teams race separately, with the first test detonation occurring in the Libyan desert in late 1946. Exhaustion and nuclear terror force peace in 1947. The Treaty of Zurich imposes a new balance. Germany retains continental dominance but loses African colonies and naval restrictions. Britain preserves its core empire, though India gains full dominion status in 1950. Japan keeps Manchuria but withdraws from Southeast Asia. Russia fragments into a loose confederation under German oversight. The United States emerges as the paramount financial and technological power, its isolationism shattered. The post-war order crystallizes into a tense bipolarity, a conservative, monarchist Middle Europa facing a liberal, maritime Anglo-American sphere. No Iron Curtain descends, instead, economic walls and naval bases define spheres. The United Nations, founded in 1948 with real great power vetoes, prevents total war but sanctions endless proxy conflicts in Africa and Latin America. Decolonization proceeds gradually through negotiated dominions, India in 1950, Indonesia in 1955, most African states by 1970, avoiding the violent ruptures of our history. Technologically, the delayed world wars yield slower but steadier progress. Nuclear arsenals grow modestly, deterrence holding without Hiroshima's shadow. Space becomes a cooperative prestige arena. A joint German-American lunar landing occurs in 1968. Computing advances through commercial rather than military urgency. Transistor radios proliferate in the 1950s. Personal computers reach homes by 1975. In our present day of 2025, this alternate world is wealthier, more culturally conservative, and strangely stable. Monarchies endure in Germany, Britain, and Japan. Democratic parliaments temper but do not overthrow them. Global population is higher, perhaps 9 billion, spared the 20th century's demographic catastrophes. Climate action begins earlier, driven by scientific consensus untainted by ideological divides. Yet authoritarian tendencies linger in the European heartland, and great power rivalry persists in cyberspace and orbit. One flawless execution of the Schlieffen Plan in 1914 spared humanity the trenches, the revolutions, the death camps, only to deliver a longer century of imperial twilight, nuclear standoffs, and calculated confrontations. History's most audacious gamble succeeded brilliantly on the battlefield, but its butterfly effects remind us that victory in war rarely guarantees peace in the world that follows. Thank you for exploring this chilling timeline where Germany conquered Paris in weeks, and forever altered the course of human events. What other pivotal moments in history teeter on such fragile turning points?